the blood that would cleanse the souls of all men made its way to the heart of Jerusalem. Down the via Dolorosa, all the way of suffering, like a lamb came the Messiah, Christ the King. But he chose to walk that road out of his love for you and me. Down the Via Dolorosa, all the way to Calvary. Ooh, to Calvary, to Calvary.
Good evening to everyone. It is my pleasure to once again be a part of this series, Conquering Health Challenges in 2020 and Beyond. This evening, we will continue to look at how we conquer the challenge of stress, anxiety, and depression, especially in this time of the COVID-19 pandemic. Thanks again to the organizers for the invitation to participate. As we begin, let us pray. Holy God, we give you thanks for the blessings of the day. As we continue with our discussion of conquering mental health challenges, I pray that your Spirit will enlighten us, educate us, and bless us in Jesus' name. Amen. In our last session, we focused on stress, anxiety, and depression, on masking the symptoms and understanding what is normal and when one should seek help. In this session, we will be looking at COVID-19 blues, coping with anxiety and depression. To recap from last session, we spoke about the normal stress response, which prepares us for fight or flight when we experience stress in manageable quantities, and how a sustained stress response brought on by too much stress at the same time or chronic stress over a prolonged period of time can result in certain chronic stress symptoms that are actually warning signs that we need to be deliberate in doing something to reduce our stress levels. We also spoke about the fact that some persons, especially those with the genetic risk, with or without stress, may develop mental illnesses as a result of stress altering the chemistry of the brain. And we looked at the symptoms of depression, which is one of the most common illnesses today. We also acknowledged that the current scenario of the COVID-19 pandemic has brought with it an undue amount of stress that puts everyone at higher risk for developing the symptoms of chronic stress and anxiety, and even developing depression. This evening, we are going to focus on how one copes with stress, anxiety, and depression. We will look at healthy coping that keeps us functioning well, even through periods of stress. And then we look at the best interventions for when one develops the mental illness of major depression or bipolar depression. Let's start with this matter of COVID-19 being stressful and the reality of it in our situation. A national survey was done in Trinidad and Tobago in July 2020, 4 months into the pandemic, at a time when the number of COVID-19 infections had plateaued, flattening the curve, and the number of deaths had leveled off at 8. An online survey link was circulated on various social media platforms and via cell phone SMS messages, so it is not necessarily a representative sample of the general population, but it does give a good idea of the concerns that individuals are experiencing. The data has not yet been fully analyzed, but this evening I will give you a sneak preview. There were 1,285 respondents who indicated what their concerns about the COVID-19 pandemic were. The top concerns presented are those where more than half, or just about half of the respondents indicated that they were worried. What we see is a range of concerns from financial to health to uncertainty about the future. But more to the point of our discussion are the proportions of persons who had these concerns. Almost 66% of people were concerned about the local economy, and almost 60% were concerned about a loved one catching COVID-19. And that was before the rapidly increasing number of cases and deaths, before Trinidad and Tobago experienced community spread. More than half of the respondents were also concerned about the rising cost of living, acquiring the illness, uncertainty about the future, and the effects of COVID-19 on their overall health and well-being and that of their loved ones. We are in the process of collecting more data with the new situation of community spread to see how the concerns have changed. But even back then, many people had concerns or worries. The study also probed to see how persons were responding to the stress. When we looked at symptoms of anxiety, like feeling nervous, feeling anxious, or being on edge, of the 1,268 persons who responded, the largest proportion had no anxiety at all. That's 37%. But more than half, that is, all of the pie chart except for the area colored green, 63% of persons had symptoms of feeling anxious, nervous, or on edge to some extent, and 21.7% experienced this nearly every day. That's 1 in 5 persons. Similarly, more than half of the sample, about 58%, reported an inability to stop or to control worry, with again about 1 in 5 experiencing constant worry nearly every day. You may recall that we identified anxiety, nervousness, and worry as symptoms of stress and not necessarily having a mental illness. But the same symptoms persisting for long enough with other associated symptoms and a negative impact on one's functioning can signify a mental illness. Using a brief screening tool in the survey, we were able to identify that 41% of persons with those symptoms of stress were very likely to have an anxiety disorder in need of some sort of intervention. In the survey, we also looked at symptoms of depression. The diagnosis of depression, if you remember, requires the presence of a depressed mood or anhedonia, meaning the loss of pleasure in doing things that were previously pleasurable. This is what we found concerning the mood of the respondents to the survey. Only 36% of persons said that they had not lost pleasure or interest in doing things. That means 64% had anhedonia, 20% nearly every day. Looking at the presence of a depressed mood, 59% had depressed mood several days, more than half of the days, or nearly every day. 15% of respondents said nearly every day. In the survey, the screen that we used for looking for depression, 39% were likely to be suffering from depression, varying in severity from mild to moderate to severe. Of those found to be depressed, 42% were severely depressed. So there is significant stress, anxiety, and depression associated with COVID-19. There is no reason to believe that the data from a sample in Trinidad and Tobago would be significantly different from the other Caribbean islands, especially since the data was collected when the COVID-19 curve was flattened. In fact, there is every reason to believe that in Trinidad and Tobago and in other islands where the community spread of COVID-19 has not yet been contained, the levels of stress and anxiety may even be higher. These survey findings clearly show that people experience stress symptoms to different degrees. So the intervention that is required would be different for different persons. If you recall, last time we spoke about those persons whose reaction to stress would be considered a normal and expected response, and for whom simply being deliberate in improving their coping strategies would bring relief to symptoms. With the universal nature of stress, there are some very simple coping strategies that should be and can easily be adopted by everyone. I will share three of them now with you and encourage you to make the commitment to incorporate these into your daily routines. The first one has to do with our attitude to stressful situations and people. It is a very simple but effective guide to coping with stress that everyone is probably familiar with, but many people probably do not apply it to their lives. It is the Serenity Prayer. Let us read it together. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. If you are not suffering from a mental illness and your anxiety and depression symptoms are the direct result of stressful situations, the most effective way to be free of symptoms is to remove the stressor. Let us use an example as it relates to the pandemic. Every time you hear a negative report, whether it concerns the number of COVID-19 deaths, the health risk of wearing masks, or the conspiracy theories surrounding a COVID-19 vaccine, it is normal for your anxiety level to rise and stay high for a while, even after you have switched off or stopped listening to the report. If there is a constant bombardment of negative exposures and negative messages, your anxiety level will remain high and you will begin to feel overwhelmed. So, what do you do to control your anxiety levels? The Serenity Prayer says, courage to change the things I can. You switch off the television, delete the WhatsApp messages without reading them, change the conversation. Many times, what is being shared is not even factual or scientifically correct. So instead, you choose your sources of information carefully and do not focus all day on the bad news, the conspiracy theories, the source of your stress. And that applies not just to COVID-19, but to whatever stress you might be dealing with. Removing the stress removes the reactive symptoms. But it is not every time that it is possible or practical to remove your stressor. If your children are being taught online, you have no choice but to strike that balance between working and schooling them at home. And if you have lost your job, while getting another will remove your stress, that is outside of your control unless you start your own business. We must know when we have to accept a stressful situation, even temporarily. So the Serenity Prayer also directs us to be wise as to when we cannot change the situation or the stress and to accept it. Let me make this clear. That does not mean accepting an abusive situation. It means accepting a stress when you do not have the capacity to remove it, but must instead cope healthily with the stress that you are experiencing. If you are in an abusive situation, that is time for courage to insist on or negotiate for a change or leave the abusive situation, even if temporarily, while your abuser gets help. Too many times we sustain high stress levels for years, trying to change people and circumstances that we have no control over. Your good mental health should never rely on others. It depends on you. Accepting a stressor does not mean that we must live with anxiety and depression. We can preserve our mental health by learning to cope. That brings me to the second of our three simple coping strategies. One way to help the body to return to normal in the midst of stress is through relaxation, deep breathing, and meditation. I know that a lot of you would have tried this one successfully. Before any kind of performance, speaking in public, a job interview, a final exam, A few deep breaths in deeply through the nostrils, pushing the diaphragm down and expanding the stomach, then slowly and audibly exhaling through the mouth as you suck that belly in can calm you, slow the heart rate, and restore a sense of control. Try it now. In deeply through the nose, stomach pushed out, slowly through the mouth, stomach pulled in. Didn't that feel good? Now, meditation is very much in vogue. Mindfulness meditation is now a very popular form of stress management, and scientific studies have supported its effectiveness in promoting good health for persons with cardiovascular disease, cancer, AIDS, and mental illnesses. It is a form of meditation designed to develop the skill of paying attention to our inner and outer experiences and thoughts. In practicing mindfulness meditation, you learn to be fully and attentively present in the moment. This is considered important in the path to enlightenment. I present this form of coping with a note of caution. When we meditate, we have no desire to seek enlightenment. The form of meditation that is desired and most effective for stress management is not one that seeks enlightenment, but one that seeks transformation, where the focus is on God and His law, reading His word, and praying. And the desire is to do His will and become more like Him. To cope with stress, we want to engage in the very effective practice of prayerful meditation. The third simple and easily implemented coping strategy that can reduce stress levels and remove depression reactions to stress is changing your lifestyle. This is good not just for stress management, but for overall physical and mental health. And the lifestyle plan New Start is well known and scientifically proven for its physical health benefits. But you probably have never recognized the mental health benefits of the New Start lifestyle. Let's take a quick look at these. A statistical analysis of several scientific studies was conducted to explore the link between what we eat and our risk of depression. The researchers concluded that a dietary pattern characterized by a high intake of fruit, vegetables, whole grain, fish, olive oil, low fat dairy, and antioxidants, and low intakes of animal foods was associated with a decreased risk of depression, while a dietary pattern characterized by a high consumption of red and or processed meat, refined grains, sweets, high-fat dairy products, butter, potatoes, and high-fat gravy with low intakes of fruits and vegetables is associated with an increased risk of depression. Research has also shown that regular exercise stimulates the production of natural endorphins, which are natural antidepressants and improve the sense of well-being. And if you want to regain a feeling of calmness, satisfaction, high energy levels, and good mood at a time of stress, two inexpensive ways to do so are to drink adequate amounts of water and surround yourself with fresh air and the greenery of natural vegetation. A very interesting study coming out of France in 2014 actually showed that when persons who normally drank 2.5 liters of water a day, that is about 12 to 15 glasses, when they had a restricted intake over a 3-day period, there was a significant decrease in their levels of contentedness, calmness, positive emotions, and vigor compared to when they were drinking the larger amounts. But interestingly, the opposite also applied. Those who were initially drinking less water and increased their intake for just 3 days experienced more energy, less mental confusion, and more alertness. Feelings of happiness, comfort, hope, excitement, and a sense of peace are also triggered by the color green. So going outside in the fresh air, especially somewhere with a lot of greenery and natural vegetation, can help boost your mood when you are feeling low. And make sure you don't only stay in the shade. Get some sunlight because, in addition to increasing levels of vitamin D, exposure to sunlight is thought to increase the brain levels of serotonin, the brain chemical that is deficient in depression and the one associated with lifting the mood and helping a person to feel calm and focused. I can recall several cases where persons have presented to me for the treatment of depression, and a thorough assessment revealed that the reason for the mood change was simply inadequate sleep. Maybe because of studying for exams or chronic pain or some other non mental health reason. The treatment recommended was to get enough sleep, and the depression went away. Sleep deprivation has been proven to result in negative mood, and restoring sleep improves the mood. For anyone suffering from a mental illness, adequate sleep is important in managing that illness. With regard to coping and lifestyle, a lot of persons resort to alcohol for its relaxing qualities. While small amounts of alcohol would decrease inhibitions, make you feel relaxed, and may appear to lift your mood, alcohol is actually a depressant, and the overall effect of continued drinking is to depress the mood. It is advisable, therefore, to avoid alcohol and any other potentially harmful substances as a form of stress management. The conclusion is a healthy lifestyle can go a long way in promoting good physical and mental health. It helps to relieve anxiety, promote a sense of calm and contentment, and protects against depression. And a change in lifestyle is a change that can be made right away. While a healthy lifestyle and good coping are enough for some people to sustain good mental health, there are others who, because of their genetics or their early life experiences, have been left psychologically bruised and vulnerable to stress. Things like a low self esteem, the inability to trust, or a need to be perfect are examples of innate personal characteristics that usually develop in response to childhood experiences that leave an individual at greater risk of developing anxiety and depression. For these persons to cope well, it usually requires the support and intervention of a mental health professional. Depending on the individual need, these professionals will allow you to ventilate your stress freely and teach you healthy coping strategies. Having the opportunity to talk to someone who listens with empathy and who you can trust allows you to share emotions like anger, sadness, disappointment, and frustration, emotions that keep the stress level high. This is an effective way of coping and is one of the basic principles of counseling. When last did you have someone listen to you? Just listen without interrupting or wanting to show how much more stress than you they are under. Everyone is so stressed these days that it's hard to get a listening ear for a prolonged period of time. Everyone wants to and needs to vent. Therapy can also guide you through changing the way you think and the way you respond to your environment. Sometimes, if it is considered necessary, these therapies may even take you back to the past with the aim of healing past painful life experiences, a process that almost inevitably involves forgiveness. Cognitive behavior therapy, or CBT for short, is one of the commonest and most effective ways of therapy. CBT aims to change the way a person thinks, helping the person to identify and remove negative self talk and negative patterns of thinking. I will give you two examples, which are really very simplified examples. Let's say that as a child, you were constantly criticized and corrected by perfectionist and demanding parents. You grow up believing that you must be perfect or else you are a failure. Having that ingrained belief can result in maladaptive thinking and maladaptive responses to life that increase your risk of depression. Every time you perform adequately, but less than what you consider perfectly, you are likely to become depressed. Most times without recognizing what's driving your depression. All that registers in your mind is that you have failed. You respond to persons with the expectation that they want you to be perfect, and this can ruin relationships. CBT helps for you to recognize that ingrained belief that lack of perfection means failure. Once you recognize your pattern of negative thinking, you then begin the uphill work with the therapist to change it, all the time praying for God to permanently change you. The second example of CBT and counseling comes from the Bible. If you recall the story of Elijah, he sunk into a state of depression when he felt that he was the only prophet left of Israel and that Jezebel was seeking to destroy him. God did a stress management intervention with Elijah. First, the lifestyle. God fed him and allowed him to sleep. Then God listened to him. That's supportive counseling. But God didn't stop there. He did a brief CBT session with Elijah. God corrected his negative thinking. He said, "It's not you alone, Elijah. Stop thinking so negatively. Stop making a catastrophe when there is none. I have 7,000 left." Once Elijah made the necessary changes to his thinking and stopped believing that the burden of Israel's conversion lay on his shoulders, he was on the road to recovery. Those are the principles of cognitive behavior therapy. There are many self help guides to develop positive thinking, but sometimes the skill of a trained therapist is needed. One thing, though, we must remember that positive thinking does not mean self reliance. Our positive thinking is always grounded in our faith in God, who is the ultimate healer. There are some persons for whom lifestyle changes, meditation, counseling, and therapy are inadequate on their own to relieve the depression. These persons suffer from a major depression. And as we have said before, this is a common mental illness. Let's look again at the criteria used by psychiatrists to make that diagnosis. Have a look at it again. Although it is a treatable disease, the World Health Organization estimates that 6 out of every 10 people who have depression in Latin America and the Caribbean do not seek or do not receive the treatment they need. Depression is more common in women than men. Between 2 and 4 out of every 10 women suffer from depression, especially after giving birth in the postpartum period. In the survey cited earlier, 39% of persons screened positive for depression, although a final diagnosis would require specialist assessment. In men, depression may actually be more common than estimated since men tend to mask depression through drinking alcohol or other acting out behaviors. Depression can be treated, and the best approach is a combination of lifestyle change, therapy, and for some persons, antidepressant medication, and mood stabilizers in the case of a bipolar depression. Sadly, there continues to be a stigma surrounding depression and its treatment. As a result, persons do not seek or receive the help that they need, and even when they do not receive the support of loved ones as they should. The biggest issue usually surrounds the use of medication, but antidepressant medication is sometimes needed to restore the imbalanced brain chemistry caused by depression. Let's get it very clear. Ultimate healing for every ailment, depression included, comes from God. But that same God has given physicians and medication through whom he works to restore functioning. In the same way that a diabetic trusts God for healing, but must take the metformin and insulin for blood sugar control and to avoid visual, circulatory, and renal complications, it's the same way that depressed persons trust God for healing, but can take a course of antidepressants to restore functioning and remove hopelessness and suicidal thoughts that not only may result in loss of life, but are symptoms that steal the hope and faith required to trust God and claim His promises for complete healing. There are a lot of myths surrounding the treatment of depression. Let's have a look at some of them. The first one, it's all in your mind. You can snap out of it if you pray more. Not true. If you need treatment, that means you are weak, lazy, or have no faith. Not true. If you talk about it, you will feel worse. Absolutely not true. Being able to share how you feel, as we shared earlier, is an important part of therapy. Next myth, you will have to be on medication for the rest of your life. A course of antidepressant medication is 1 year. With regular and consistent use, the average person can discontinue antidepressant medication after a year and maintain a good mood through healthy lifestyle and good coping. When it is time to stop the medication, because it is not addictive, the psychiatrist will gradually reduce and stop it without any difficulty or fear of withdrawal symptoms. The next myth says the medication will damage your organs and send you mad. All medication have side effects. With any particular drug or medication, one person may get no side effects, while others on the same drug get enough side effects to require them to stop the drug. It is important to find the drug that is best for you. Antidepressants do not damage your organs. Before being placed on antidepressants, a doctor will ensure that all of your organs, especially your kidneys and liver, are functioning well, since these are necessary to metabolize and excrete, meaning break down and get rid of the medication. Antidepressants do not cause madness, but a thorough assessment and accurate diagnosis will ensure that persons are not placed unnecessarily on medication or misdiagnosed and given unneeded medication, both of which may have adverse effects. The last myth on the slide is a directive to eat bananas since they contain a lot of serotonin. While depression is caused by a deficit of serotonin in the brain, and bananas do have a lot of serotonin, unfortunately, bananas do not help depression because dietary sources of serotonin do not cross the blood-brain barrier and therefore do not increase brain serotonin to help depression. As I said, these are all myths, not true. When persons are in the depths of sadness and despair, these statements and recommendations do not help them. Men and women of faith do become depressed. It is not a matter of weakness or lack of faith or sinfulness or demon possession. It can happen to anyone, even church leaders, and more commonly so in this time of the stress of the COVID-19 pandemic. When the depression is severe, antidepressant medication is needed. Antidepressants correct the chemical imbalance in the brain, restore functioning, and prevent the risk of harm through suicide. Studies consistently show that a combination of medication, counseling, and a healthy lifestyle is the best approach to the treatment of depression, and arching over all, trusting God who provides the ultimate healing. Social support is also important for the person suffering from depression. So what can you do if you recognize that someone is depressed or getting depressed? First of all, you must appreciate that depression is a common and serious illness, not a weakness. If you knew that someone was suffering from cancer or another serious illness, you'd never say, just get over it. Don't say that for depression. Secondly, encourage them to get help, especially if they share thoughts of wanting to hurt themselves. It is not dangerous to talk to a person about their suicidal thoughts. You would not put the thought in their head. That's another myth. And suicidal expressions should never be taken lightly. Thirdly, be supportive and understanding. And don't assume that because someone looks good and can manage to smile, that they are not depressed. You don't look like you're depressed. That's a very painful statement for those many persons with what we call high functioning depression. Persons with high functioning depression, also called persistent depressive disorder, have all of the symptoms of depression enough to impair their functioning, but the symptoms are mild enough that they can push and get through a day. At the end of the day, they are, however, exhausted and irritable. To the outside world, they appear okay, but internally, it's a battle to stay afloat. All depressed persons need your love, support, and prayers. Don't make them feel badly for having an illness that they have no control over, or worse yet, for cooperating with treatment. Your support and encouragement may save a life. As I close, perhaps the most important lifestyle change that can be made for yourself and as a reminder to someone around you who may be depressed is to trust in God. There is a peace that passes all understanding that comes when we trust in God. That peace empowers us to cope and promotes healing in all areas of that life, of our life. We get that peace when we trust Him, claim His promises, and reach out to Him in prayer. There's scientific evidence for that too. In an article published out of Australia in 2007 entitled Prayer as Medicine, How Much Have We Learned? The authors reviewed and analyzed all the studies surrounding prayer and health and concluded that there is a positive association between prayer and improved health outcomes. Anyone who might be depressed must be reminded to direct their gaze upwards, even when the trials come, even if they are on antidepressants. Remind them that weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reed, for your timely and enlightening presentation. I am sure that, like me, our brethren and friends who view this program can attest to the fact that the information provided these last 2 nights on mental health was indeed an education. It was practical, it is practical, with recommendations that can be utilized in these dire times. Our gratitude is also extended to the health team from the Great Hall Seventh-day Adventist Church in District Number 1. Sister Marcy Goodrich opened tonight's service with prayer and read our scripture reading, while Sister Ann Boyce introduced the speaker. For that beautiful musical item, we thank Sister Tia Corbing, also from the Great Hall Church. Dr. Tamara Graves, thank you for making us all feel ever so welcome to this service. And thank you too, Sister Patricia Brooms, in advance for your closing prayer. I am Amanda Graves, and we three are members of the Checker Hall Seventh-day Adventist Church. Now, tomorrow night, Dr. Natalie Graves will speak to us on one of the most dreaded diseases we know, cancer, and its prevention. Her presentation will also include management techniques and strategies designed to mitigate the disastrous and negative impact of cancer on our health and well-being. During the next 24 hours, while we wait in anticipation for the invaluable information, let us utilize the time wisely and invite our relatives and friends to log on as well, so they too can benefit and be blessed. Until tomorrow evening, we wish you a restful night and a blessed day tomorrow.
Let us all bow our heads for prayer. Almighty and most merciful Father who art in heaven, we are thankful to you once again for bringing us to the end of the third night of our health emphasis week. I pray that by God's help and His grace, we will determine in our hearts and minds to live more healthier lifestyles. May God bless us and bring us together again tomorrow night. In Jesus' name I pray, and for His sake, amen.